Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Arturo Bris, and I am the director of the IMD World Competitiveness Center. I'm extremely honored and pleased to announce to you the launch of the 2021 IMD World Competitiveness Rankings, which we are going to present through, I think, a very interesting webinar with the three excellent speakers that are going to talk about what we think are going to be the key issues that we're going to be talking about in the next years in terms of competitiveness. Let me introduce to you our speakers today. We will have, and it's an honor for us to have with us the Minister of National Development Council of Taiwan, Mr. Ming-Hsin Kung, who we're very welcome. We're very happy to welcome.
This is go. Yeah.
Thank you. We will have shortly with us Minister Kyriakos Pierrakakis from Greece. He's the Minister of Digital Governance of Greece and very much involved in the entire digital transformation of the country. Unfortunately, and actually fortunately for the country, as we speak, Minister Pierrakakis is meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, discussing and introducing the recovery plan for the country. And he will join us immediately after his meeting is over. As you can imagine, we will never consider that our webinar is more important than the President of the European Commission. And finally, we have with us, and it's also a pleasure for me to introduce you to our long-time partner and friend, Melinda Cilento, who is the CEO of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, CEDA, who, as I say, is also the IMD World Competitiveness Center partner in Australia. Welcome, everybody. Before I start, and before I start asking questions, I just want to give you a snapshot of the rankings this year, which I'm not going to discuss because all of this information pertaining the rankings of the year can be found already in our website because the results have been publicly announced. And of course, the media are going to pick on them starting now and obviously in the coming days. Okay, there are winners and losers. There are countries that come up to the top, and as you can see, for example, Taiwan this year makes it to the top 10, which is a good reason to have with us Minister Kung. And I think he's going to be the first one that is going to get my question, because Taiwan has done an extraordinarily good job during the pandemic. It has balanced very well the management of the health crisis with the right economic measures. And I would like to ask Minister Kung to tell us and to teach us, as a good lesson for other countries, what do you think have been the initiatives of economic policy and health policy that Taiwan has implemented in order to be so successful in the management of the crisis?
Thank you very much. I am very happy to have this opportunity to see you all. Let me brief you quickly our experience during the past year. When COVID-19 hit us, actually, we reacted very fast because we had SARS experience. We learned that in 2002, 2003, we reckoned that this is something very serious. So we immediately take actions, for example, border controls, or ask our people to wear masks, wash hands, and maintain social distance. We right away took actions. And also, because of these control measures, there must be economic impacts. Therefore, we passed special budgets to assist people's livelihood. So these special regulations and programs are targeted at people who are severely impacted by the pandemics. In terms of assistance program, we do not give money to everybody. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. We realize the impact of the pandemic is different from industry to industry, from people to people. Therefore, we identify the most vulnerable groups or industries to be the target of government assistance program. That is to say, we want to maintain employment. Taiwan has a population of 23 million. Working population is about 12 million. So we want to secure their jobs. We want to keep them at their work. Another very important thing is money flow. We want to keep the money flow consistent and smooth. We provide guarantee, a credit guarantee, and we told bank not to withdraw money, to keep the loan floating. And with the income and the money flow can be maintained, we were able to maintain the economic activities. And also at the same time, pandemics changed our daily life. A lot of activities are moving online. And to go online, we need lots of digital tools. Taiwan happens to be a very strong center for IT products. So we have strong IT industries, and we secure employment, and we help to facilitate cash flow. So therefore, with these tools, we were able to maintain the economic development while fighting the pandemics. Our growth rate last year was 3.12 last year. Actually, we used IMD data. We were very thankful to IMD for providing this information. We look at countries that performed fairly well during the pandemic and countries that performed not very well. We compare these two groups of countries, and we realize that countries that performed very good are several characteristics that we found. Number one, these outperforming countries are with relatively better physical conditions. Number two, those are countries with better financial conditions. Number three, these outperforming countries are mostly with resilient industries. Number four, private sector household savings are higher, and also higher educational level. So these are characters we found that makes a difference. So a reasonable assumption, a reasonable argument to follow is under the impact of COVID-19. Government with better physical conditions, you have more room for implementing your physical policies. You have more tools to support the industry to continue to develop. Number three, and also if household savings are higher, households are more prepared to absorb the short-term impact of the pandemics. And also education level. Pandemic brings a lot of confusions regarding what's true and what's not true. People with higher education level can really tell what's true and what's not true and work with the government. So let me come back to your question, Professor Boris. You asked me what we did to outperform. So I just briefed you the basic condition, and also because we have a very strong IT industry, and we took action right away. We reacted very fast. I would say these are reasons why we were not that severely impacted last year. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is very interesting and I keep your message on my record because basically you're telling us that that characteristics of the economy, particularly of the private sector, allow more space for the government to intervene with speed. And I find that a very, very, very compelling, very compelling ingredient. That is, the more competitive economies actually could do better. Thank you. Melinda, you may think that we are including only islands to explain their performance and their success. And as you can imagine, many people have argued that countries that were isolated geographically, cope better with the pandemic. But it's also true that Australia closed down as many other countries. And at the same time, I think it's doing much better because life seems to be almost back to normal, like which is kind of a dream for us, for example, in Europe. And I will ask you a similar question to the one that I asked Minister Kung. What do you think that Australia did well, and what are the lessons that you could share with us for other countries?
Well, thanks, Arturo. And I think in many respects, you can see that Australia has done very well, as you pointed out. Today, we had the latest unemployment figures in Australia. Our unemployment rate now is 5.1%. The level of employment, the rate of is higher than it was pre-pandemic. GDP is higher than pre-pandemic. It has really been a V-shaped recovery for us. There's no doubt that being an island helps. In the first stages, you can close your borders, you can manage the pandemic, very, very clearly by limiting, people coming into your country, and that definitely helps. The other thing that helps is not dissimilar to what we've just heard from Taiwan. The government reacted quickly and it reacted boldly. Right from the beginning, when the government started talking about the measures that it would introduce, they were larger than people expected. I think the government responded very quickly. We saw responses both to limit the pandemic, but then understanding what that meant for the economy. The government came out very quickly with payments to help people keep their workers, increase payments to people who are unemployed, increase payments to other people who are on the pension, agreements around freezing rents so that businesses didn't have to pay rent or could reach agreements around paying certain amounts of rent. There were changes to the bankruptcy provisions, a whole host of things, cash flow support for business. It was a very substantial fiscal response. The other thing for Australia is that we have different layers of government. Our federal government and our state governments got together and responded as one government, really, for a period of time, forming a national cabinet. So there was a very clear and single message that was going to the community about how we responded to this. Those measures have been incredibly successful. And we've seen business confidence and consumer confidence rebound and business activity start to return. We've still seen different states close their borders. We're still not getting completely free movement within Australia. I'm in the state of Victoria and in the city of Melbourne. We've had another lockdown recently. This is our fourth lockdown. It is starting to take its toll, I have to say. So broadly, the country is back to normal, but we're still having pockets where we haven't. The one thing I would say, Arturo, is that in some ways, being an island was helpful, but the challenge that we have now is actually getting back to business as usual. Other countries are doing a much better job with vaccination rates. We are actually lagging in vaccination rates because we've become, I think, a bit comfortable behind our borders, and it's become a real issue. And of course, we're a country that relies very much on immigration, and we've had none. So I think we've had a really good short-term response, but I'm sure we'll come back to some of the longer-term challenges, which I think your survey highlights. The results of that survey, there's a tension. We've slipped down the rankings. We're doing really well at the moment, but some of the other indicators are not so great. So happy to come back and talk to those later on in our conversation.
Let me pick on one thing that you have said, because I want to ask you further. Before I do that, let me remind our audience that you are welcome to ask questions. I will be reading your questions from either the chat or the Q&A utility in Zoom, and we'll have obviously questions from the audience in the last part of this webinar. But you said something, that as a Spanish person interests me a lot, but also something that I have seen in other countries. For example, in the United States, you say that the local and the national governments came together and they created a cabinet for the crisis. How was this successful? Was this a leadership strength from the Prime Minister? What is a commitment by the local governments to team up with the central government? What do you think was the key for the success of such policy?
Well, I think initially it was the Prime Minister calling together the state premiers to come to actually form, for a period of time, a national cabinet, because like everyone else, we were so surprised by what was happening and the speed with which it was happening. Obviously thinking about supply chains, critical availability of PPE and all of those types of things in Australia were issues that were very much front and centre. So in the very, very early stages, those different levels of government got together and performed really well. And I think it was under the leadership of the Prime Minister. Over time, there have been probably a few fractures, if I can put it that way, and some disagreements as some states have kept what we call very hard borders and not allowing Australians to travel from one state to another. And it's been, it's been a pressure point, if you like, at different stages. I think when it really counts, the governments worked well together. When we started to do better, we started to see, different states pulling in different directions. So it will be tested, but when it was needed, it worked very well.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Let me go back to you, Minister Kung. You stressed earlier the importance of the public finances and government efficiency in fighting the crisis. Looking forward, we see that for all countries, there has been an amazing effort made both at the fiscal and the monetary level. Okay, fiscal policies have been expansionary, monetary policies too. In essence, we have seen that countries are borrowing from the past and from the future. No? So my question for you is about the future. So how do you think, generally speaking, and also using the example of Taiwan, how do you see looking forward how these policies, fiscal and monetary policies, are going to be sustainable? And at the end of the day, are we going to see a dramatic change in the coming years of those policies?
Monetary or fiscal policy, I think these are more traditional tools to manage the macro economy. And traditionally, these policies are trying to be a tool to react to counter anti-cyclical forces. But traditionally, in addition to those policies, governments also introduce structural reforms. So these two strains of policies are just tools, or just a means to an end. So these are not the only tools that the government have at their disposal to address economic ills. So take Taiwan again, for example. In the past, Taiwan used to think about what we need, what kind of transformation we need to embark on in order to go into the future. Take digital transformation, for example, invest heavily in the country's digital transformation, carbon reduction, and energy transformation. And thirdly, we try to boost the development of our biotech and healthcare industry, and also cyber and national defense as well, and also provide subsidy to the disadvantaged and the youth population. So we actually earmark a lot of budget to go to those specified areas. But we also realize that if it's only the government who inputs resources into these areas, we cannot go a long way. So we also need to collaborate with the private sector to tap into private investments in order to go a long way and be sustainable. So we need to also rely on the capital markets or other channels of funds in order to make industry development more sustainable. So my point is, monetary and fiscal policies, of course, are just a means to an end. They are just tools, part of the government's tool set, but we need to think about what objectives we aim to achieve at the end of the day. In recent years, we see that people have been discussing various issues regarding structural reforms. For example, we just mentioned digital transformation or carbon reduction, energy reduction, or carbon neutrality ambitions by 2050. And I also mentioned about the key industries such as biotech and healthcare, or how the younger population or the advantaged group of the society can be better assisted to achieve inclusive growth. So these are some of the common issues that we have on our agenda. I think that Taiwan already putting various resources, be it fiscal policies, budgetary expansion, or we try to channel the necessary financial resources to targeted areas. So I think if monetary and fiscal policy can work well as a mix in the years going forward and go to the targeted areas where they need the most, I think that would be the right direction to go. So we won't see only the monetary or fiscal policies as a only tools that we have to combat economic ills. These are just the overarching policy direction, which we think will create nice results. So these are already things that we are doing at this moment. So hopefully this can serve as useful references for other countries. Thank you.
And thank you, Your Excellency. That's very clear and highlighting. Let me now welcome His Excellency Minister Kyriakos Pierrakakis from Greece, Minister of Digital. Let me say correctly, Minister of Digital Governance of Greece. Thank you very much for being with us. I understand that you have been very busy until now, and we are very grateful that you booked some time from your busy agenda today with very important things to discuss. So welcome to our webinar. How are you?
Apologies for being a little bit delayed. We're having a visit by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, vis-à-vis the approval of Greece's plan in the European Commission for the RRF, the post-COVID reconstruction fund. A crucial element of the plan is on digital, so I just made the presentation to the President of the Commission with regards to our proposals, and this is why I had to be delayed, so apologies.
And the last thing that we would like to be is an obstacle in the implementation of the plan. So thank you. So I have a question for you. We have been discussing the key success factors for Australia and for Taiwan in coping with the health and economic crisis. I think what Greece, and I'm speaking like a Spanish and like a Spaniard here, what Greece has shown to the rest of Europe and to the world, it's a great ability to manage the health crisis, but also a very amazing ability to use digital technologies to fight the pandemic and the economic crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? So what has been the reason for this excellence in digital technology in Greece?
Very briefly, even the place where I'm connecting with you right now and where I made the presentation is a manifestation of the country's digital ambition. I'm currently in the headquarters of Civil Protection in Greece, and namely in what we call the War Room, where we actually run the vaccination operation, which is digital A to Z. Our vaccination platform is, I guess, one of the success factors of the overall digital platform. Gov.gr, our single government gateway, where we have more than 1,170 services, which we started last year, is also a manifestation, I guess, of this significant progress. I would say that we achieved this, even though when we started in 2019, obviously, we were not in a front-runner status. We achieved it by having a very ambitious and aggressive agenda vis-à-vis the implementation of this program. We understood that bureaucracy is an issue for Greece. We have had perennially high levels of bureaucracy on certain areas, and we felt that digital is a core ingredient of the solution to this problem. So we set specific KPIs. We created a new organization, a new ministry for digital, where we put together the business process re-engineering functions, the digitization functions, and the telecommunications functions of policy under a single roof. And we tried to recruit the best people available from all facets of digital, from the public or the private sector, academia, or startups, trying to bring them together and develop a team. We did that long before our last national election, more than a year before. So we were quite ready on day one to start implementing this very ambitious agenda. Then COVID-19 came, and we had what was necessary before became even more necessary afterwards. So, but the team was there, the plan was there, and we were quite ready to continue implementing it. We just changed the way in which we instrumentalized the plan. We understood that not only did we try to simplify services, we also felt that this was an instrument for COVID-19 as well, as we were eliminating services offered physically by the state and we rendered them digital through Gov.gr. This was also a tool to battle the virus. So everybody understood that this was a national plan to achieve, and everybody is very committed in achieving it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I think I will note that as a very important conclusion of our webinar today, because what I hear from all of you is that your countries did the homework before the crisis. That is, when the pandemic hit, you had already prepared yourselves. And I think that's a very important lesson, especially thinking about the next possible crisis, which, who knows what is going to be. Let me move to a different topic that we have highlighted this year as well. Our ranking in 2021 is incorporating several new indicators of sustainability. For example, the extent to which a country has been implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. They are very general, and when we look at the different countries, the implementation of those objectives varies from country to country. My last trip before the pandemic was to Australia, and I remember I was with Melinda in an event that you may remember as well, where there was a heated debate about sustainability. And I want to start with you on that question, because clearly Australia, that has been a commodity-driven country with fossil fuels, export and mining, and I've seen that the debate about sustainability has been the most heated. But it's also a country where I think you have very clear ideas. So how do you see sustainability playing a role? How do you see this debate being implemented in actual policies? And overall, do you see that Australia is making progress on sustainable goals?
Well, not an easy set of questions, to be honest, Arturo. I mean, I think we're making progress, but there's still a lot of space for more action and more progress, if I can put it that way. I think where we're seeing a lot of the progress being led, it's actually being led by business and by state governments rather than our federal government. Businesses, particularly our big resources companies, not surprisingly, are very much engaging with international and institutional investors, and the pressure around some of the sustainability issues, particularly decarbonisation, has been front and centre for many of them. And so we've seen a lot of our internationally competitive large resources companies having to respond to those pressures and do so, I think, very proactively on the whole. We've seen state governments adopt commitments around carbon emissions, but we are still at a point where our federal government is not committing to a time frame for net zero, for instance. They're very big issues. There is a lot of push for a net zero target to be adopted, for the simple reason that you start aligning the aspirations and the commitments and the investments of all sectors of the private sector, of the state governments and the federal government. So there's still work to be done there. We're a country that, of course, has our own climate risks as well, so more to be done in terms of the actual response in terms of climate resilience. And I expect that what we will see more of in the future is actually increasing focus on issues like biodiversity. Mm-hmm. So I think we're making progress, but I think many around the world would be surprised, if I'm honest, by the headlines in the papers and some of the conversation that happens in our newspapers, where there is still a lot of pushback against some of the decarbonisation aspirations, if you like. There's still a fierce debate about the role of fossil fuels in this country, and I don't think we've got to a place where we can put our hand on our heart and say that we are addressing this in the spirit of creating the most opportunities, if I can put it that way. You know, for CEDA, we believe that there is an agenda here about energy advantage. Yes, our history is fossil fuels, but we have an extensive renewables opportunity as well. And what we would like to see is a focus on where the opportunities are. And there is research around the world around, businesses that are tackling sustainability and technology opportunities together are not surprisingly the businesses that are growing the fastest. So I think we're still framing the debate too often around what the costs of these changes are, rather than actually looking for where the opportunities are and recognising there will be transition and managing that transition. So still a way to go in decarbonisation as well as energy. And I think, if I'm honest, I think the pressure will only increase.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me ask also our excellencies here as well. Mr. Kung, so how does sustainability play in the Taiwanese agenda?
Yes, of course, sustainability is a very key issue in Taiwan as well. Of course, there are 17 United Nations SDGs. And on the cabinet level, we've established a sustainability committee to steer relevant issues. That is the interdepartmental coordination committee. Of course, two key issues stand out in this effort. The first one is the support to the socially disadvantaged and to achieve inclusive growth. About 4 years ago, we already started to increase the minimum wage of Taiwan and increase child care subsidy for young couples. We've invested huge resources in these areas. We also provide support to long-term care institutions or provide affordable or social housing to those in need or the disadvantaged group of society. Therefore, of course, we want to address the wealth inequality issue. Of course, the income gap has been further reduced in Taiwan over the years. Secondly, the second key pillar is to achieve green and sustainable development. In the past 4 years, we started to embark on the road of energy transformation. Of course, Taiwan is an island country or island economy. So in the past, we import more than 90% of our energies from abroad. But we hope that by 2025, through renewable energy generation, including PV or offshore wind or other renewable, we can achieve 20% of our energy coming from renewables. Of course, that's the only first step in our journey towards energy transformation. Actually, on Earth Day this year, on April 22nd, our President Tsai also made a public commitment for Taiwan to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2050. And recently, we try to speed up the process, and we are charting the roadmap to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. That's the ambition for Taiwan. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, Minister Pierrakakis, I'm asking you as a European minister, because as you know, the European recovery plan suggests the way forward with this massive investment in ESG. So how is Greece going to implement that plan? And what are your suggestions in that front of sustainability and ESG investment?
I mean, as you very well know, each country is following up with regards to the implementation of the 17 goals through a different mix. But the proposed end result, it's at the end of the day the same, but each one is following up with their own path. And as you mentioned, the recovery plan, the plan that we presented right now has more than 30%, almost 35% is focusing on green. Another 23% is focusing on digital. There is an element where those two pillars are being intertwined with regards to measuring activities vis-a-vis the environment. Overall, we have a strategy which is quite simple. What you can't measure, you can't reform. So we need to start significantly measuring our activities in those sectors. We plan to remove all lignite-based production, which is still significant in Greece, by 2028 at the latest, to double our production of renewable energy by 2030. And in this regard, apart from the smart uses of energy, more efficient and smart uses of energy in our lives vis-a-vis this intertwining of green and digital that I mentioned before, there is also a strategy of inclusiveness, because this transition needs to be inclusive for all citizens. So especially in the areas that will be affected by, for instance, the removal of the lignite-based production, we have a very solid social cohesion plan for these areas in order to restore them for tourism, for industrial production, etc. And we feel that this is also extremely significant in order to facilitate this transition.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to ask you, so there is a question from the audience, and I want to ask all of you, because it is about the recent experience, and probably we need to set some lessons for the future. The question regards lockdowns. And I would like to ask you, what is, in your opinion, the key to success when you shut down an economy? Because your economies, your three economies, to some extent, to different degrees, were locked down. But what we have observed this year in the rankings is that lockdowns work in different ways. So, for example, it was very effective in China but it was not effective in the UK. And then you see that reflected in economic growth in both countries. So starting with Minister Kung, I would like to ask you that question from the audience. What do you think is why was a lockdown successful in Taiwan, or why are lockdowns successful everywhere? What is the key?
Thank you. From Taiwan's experience, our lockdown policy is mostly border control. Within the country, we do not have a true lockdown. However, we ask people to behave differently, to look out for things. For example, you must wear masks when you go out. You want to wash your hands frequently and do not congregate. These are the minimum requirements. And because the pandemic is more severe today, so we closed down all restaurants. Taipei City, New Taipei City, we only allow takeout. We do not allow dining. So this is what we do right now. And of course, government understands as the pandemic evolves, we should be vigilant. I think the ultimate solution is vaccine. We have a two-pronged approach. Number one, wear mask, do not congregate, wash your hands. That's number one. And number two, we want to increase the vaccine popularity. And so we are so far doing okay. About half a month ago, we have about 400 to 500 cases per day. But because of the right policy, the numbers are coming down. So we are now in degree level 3 lockdown. So we do not people to congregate, and we isolate, confirm the cases. Today, the number has down to about 100 or so. So the affected rate is about 0.01%. So it's very low. I'm sorry, 0.01. So 1 out of 100 is very low. Vaccine, we do not have a lot of vaccine right now. But people understand the severity of the pandemic. People are now more willing to take vaccines. We like to thank the United States and Japan for donating vaccines to us. We hopefully in July and August, we will receive more vaccines we have purchased, and if the domestic produced vaccine can come out, rolled out smoothly, we will certainly increase the popularity of vaccine very quickly. Lockdown is a short-term measure. Ultimately, you have to reopen your cities. You have to take steps. You have to go with a plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Pierrakakis, what do you think? So how would you recommend in terms of lockdown for the future? If you had to do it again, would you do it again, and how?
I would say that the lockdown measures need to satisfy 5 principles. They need to be well designed. They need to be well explained. They need to be well implemented. They need to be well enforced. And they need to be well matched by an appropriate economic policy mix in order to support them. So in our case, for instance, monetary policy is centralized at the ECB level, but fiscal policy was primarily run by the member states. So in this regard, also digital, also given the functions that I served as a minister and I have been serving for the last 2 years, was a core ingredient of policy, because digital enabled us to continue serving citizens during lockdowns. And as businesses had to ensure business continuity, the state had to ensure state continuity. And we tried to build a new service every single day. And this is how we built the government platform, GovGR. In effect, we took an already existing policy, as I mentioned before, the policy of simplification, of serving citizens better, and we rendered it a tool to battle the virus and for the state to gain trust. And in this regard, as we were building this new edifice, citizens felt the state to be better and better and better run in a very challenging period. So the stock of trust has increased. Now, obviously, on a final note, the vaccination rollout is obviously a very significant part of this equation. And the quicker it runs, but not only a function of speed, a function of the quality of the system. We try to focus a lot on the quality of the vaccination platform, the lack of long lines of citizens waiting in the vaccination centers. We developed a fully digital and fully lean process. We feel that this also helps enable any other measure which is supportive vis-a-vis managing the virus. So we have gained a lot of experience. We have learned both from our experience and from the experience of others. And I guess we're even more ready to face the upcoming challenges.
Thank you. I will ask you, Melinda, as well the same question, but let me add a twist, because there's a question in the audience about Australia opening up in the future, and the question is whether the country is going to open up soon, and what do you think is going to be the cost of not opening up the country to foreigners?
Yeah, thanks, Arturo, and thanks to the audience for the question, because what I was going to actually reference was there are the internal lockdowns of individual cities and places, and then there is the border lockdown, which is the country of Australia. So let me talk to both of those. I think the points that have been made already are relevant for Australia as well. Clear communication, understanding where your community is at and what their natural kind of tendency is, if you like, about accepting these types of measures and communicating to that is really, really important. I think there's a social compact, as I describe it, that if you're asking your citizens to do unusual things, to not run their businesses, to not go into work, to not go to stores, etc., providing support for them is part of that compact. And I think that was very important in the Australian circumstance, that the government was providing that support, and that, I think, led to a greater acceptance, if you like, in the community. The point that I would make that I don't think has really been touched on by the other two comments is that I think the policy has to evolve, so that I think the community understands harsher measures early on, but as you evolve, they expect QR codes. They expect to be able to find ways to live with the virus, if you like, to not have to rely on such draconian measures. So I think as the crisis evolves, I think there is an expectation in the community that the response becomes more sophisticated and less on or off, or less blunt, if you like. In Victoria, in the fourth lockdown, I think there has been more frustration that some of those digital capabilities haven't evolved. The contact tracers have done a good job, but things like QR codes for visiting places were slow. So I think that's a really important part of maintaining community support. The border lockdown is very interesting. As I said earlier, we've had state borders locked down, and we've had the international borders sort of locked down. I have to say, community support for these measures is very high, incredibly high. And I think it's because the economy is strong. There's been talk of things like tourism. Actually, more Australians travel overseas than people come to Australia. So some parts of tourism are booming. But whilst the pandemic is out there seems to be a real risk aversion. The problem for us, I think, is that it's led to complacency on vaccination rates, and we are slow on vaccination. And this is what we need, is more vaccination. So I think that's the real challenge. We're now looking at possibly not having the community fully vaccinated until the middle of next year. And our last budget, which was in May, didn't assume that the borders would fully start to open until the middle of next year. Business is very anxious about this. What does it mean? We're already hearing from a lot of businesses that they have very severe skill shortages, particularly in areas like digital and data, where we want to make the most of the rapid digitisation that we saw last year. So I think there is a real risk to it, certainly for our international students, business and universities. They are very worried about it. So many in business would like to see borders open sooner, but at the moment the community is very much behind, keeping them closed and a little bit reluctant on seemingly and picking up the pace on vaccination.
Thank you. So I think that's very useful. I think from your responses, what I grasp and get is that certainly it was much more important to shut down borders than preventing internal mobility. To some extent, it was more successful for most of your countries, but at the same time, as Minister Pierrakakis said, within our border, we need to implement good lockdowns, which basically means, and that I find interesting, to find a good match between the health measures, in particular lockdowns, and the economic measures to accompany the lockdown, to satisfy the needs of citizens. Let me then address a very important topic as well as the next part of our discussion, which has to do with technology. Obviously, we have already talked about that, okay? And all of you have mentioned the importance of digital technologies and digital measures in coping with the pandemic. How do you see in the future and beyond COVID-19, in the future, digital transformation of a country and technology being a pillar of future economic development? Okay. In this case, I want to start with Minister Pierrakakis, obviously, because that's your department and your competency, and I'm sure that you are going to have a supporting view on technology.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, digital policy for us, we view it as a silver bullet, I would say, domestically. We view it as a mechanism both to resolve outstanding issues of the past, chronic problems that we have had vis-a-vis serving citizens and corporations. To give you one example, there are certain projects that have remained from the past, even as something as simple as the digitization of our national archives, vis-a-vis the paperwork that we have in certain areas of the Greek state, in the pension system, in the justice system, in the health system, in the cadastre. So all of those projects, something as simple as that, can further enable how we serve citizens and corporations. Because, for instance, we have chronic delays in our pension issuance system. So we need to solve this cluster of problems. And then there is another cluster, I would say, of opportunities. The potential that we seek to unleash vis-a-vis all these new emerging technologies, what we call the fourth industrial revolution, the convergence of the digital, the physical, and the biological. This is, I guess, on our doorstep. So we need to design a full scope of such projects. To give you one example, we tried to design in Greece a very innovative 5G auction, through which 25% of the auction proceeds went towards the establishment of a specialized venture capital fund, which in its turn invests in the 5G ecosystem. And we tried to create a virtuous circle using an auction to create a market in the technological frontier. This is one example. Another example is that we have reserved a portion of the spectrum and we offer it for free to startups, to universities, to research centers. But this is just one technology. We needed to take the whole scope of emerging technologies, regulate them, and develop opportunities and unleash our potential while covering the gaps of the past, as I described before. Obviously, we will have a spectrum of threats that we will need to resolve, a spectrum of projects which in their turn need focus. Cybersecurity is an obvious such case. We need to focus more on this in establishing our critical infrastructure security. But that being said, I would say that my predisposition is that we view this as a significant opportunity, both for problem resolution and for unleashing potential.
Mm-hmm. Let me complement my question, because as a business school professor, and working with company strategies, then the question is always, so what is your vision? That is, what is your final goal when it comes to digital transformation of Greece? Do you have a particular KPI, or how would you call yourself fully satisfied?
The KPI is Estonia. I would say that vis-a-vis digital transformation, I would say that Estonia has one of the most digital of states. In Estonia, you can do digitally all things but three: get married, getting divorced, and buy a house or real estate. Here we have started deviating from this process because next month Greeks will be able to divorce via the government platform. But having said this, Estonia built itself digital from the beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. In our case, we have an already established bureaucratic system where we're trying to simplify processes and digitize at the same time. So Estonia is the compass, it's not the map. But more or less, it's the qualitative end result that we're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one. It's a good one. I mean, obviously, also from our perspective in our center, Estonia is an example that we look at very carefully in all dimensions, particularly digital. Thank you. Minister Kung, so technology, and what is the role that technology will play in the future success and development of Taiwan?
Thank you very much for the question. I think in terms of digital transformation, that's already a key issue we have been supporting over the years, because one of the strengths of Taiwan is that we already excel in hardware manufacturing. We already top the group, especially in semiconductor manufacturing. So we already have our existing strengths, but for digital transformation going forward, we need to think about how to tap into those strengths on hardware to come up with further total solutions or complementary software. According to our survey in Taiwan, on average, only 55% of our enterprises already have the capability for digital transformation, but the additional 30% would like to finish their transformation in the next 2 to 3 years. So one of the priority of the government is to satisfy the needs of this additional 30% so they can expedite their process for digital transformation. So going into the next 4 years, we've already earmarked a special budget in addition to our regular budget that will go solely to digital transformation purposes. The total of nearly 100 billion NT dollars will go to digital transformation, half of which will go to 5G infrastructure upgrade. So as you can see, in terms of our positioning or preparation for digital transformation, we will focus on 3 areas. First, semiconductor or advanced technology improvement. Taiwan is home to leading semiconductor players such as TSMC and so forth. Also, we want to strengthen 5G infrastructure. In the past, we only have closed network or topped by Ericsson, Nokia, or Huawei in China. But under the 5G environment, we need to provide open architecture, which will also unleash a lot of business opportunities. Last but not least is the deployment of the AIoT, AI plus IoT, which will generate a lot of solutions. We have 2 keys on our agenda. The first one is smart city solutions, and we will go on to launch smart business opportunities. So we hope that in the next 3 to 5 years at least, we can build on our existing strengths in hardware manufacturing and try to transform our lifestyle in order to be successful in digital transformation, in smart city and smart manufacturing. These dual engines of our growth, we hope these areas will bear fruit in the next 3 to 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then I will ask Melinda about technology as well. How do you, because obviously in our digital competitiveness ranking, one of the advantages of Australia is the positive attitude of people and companies to digital transformation. And in that regard, how do you see technology playing a role?
Oh, look, Arturo, I think like everyone else, technology is going to have to be front and center, both in terms of the opportunities before us, but also in terms of, as I said earlier, responding to some of the challenges we have around climate change and how we think about our energy future and things like that. I think there is, obviously a high digital take-up and preparedness for that in the community. But I think one of the things we really have to think about in Australia is how we bring the community along with our digital and technology aspirations. So I think how we provide stewardship for these opportunities and how we think about regulating them is absolutely going to be critical. I'm not sure we're doing that all that well. The government has an aspiration for Australia to be a leading digital nation by 2030, but there's not an awful lot of detail around that. There are quite a few things going on, but they're all over the place. And we've seen a lot of churn at the leadership level in terms of ministers who are overseeing this. So I think there's tremendous opportunity, both in terms of how we enable digital and tech take-up in the business community, but also huge opportunity in the delivery of government services. I think on that front, the equivalent of Estonia for us in Australia is the New South Wales government. I think they are at the head of the pack. They've done a really good job, I think, in digitising their service delivery. And not surprisingly, in my view, they are the best government within our country in responding to COVID. And they've been able to do that through their use of digital technology and data. And they've been able to manage outbreaks and things like that in quite a sophisticated way. So I think there's huge opportunity, but I think we're just at the cusp of it. And to be frank, Arturo, I think some of the issues that are flagged in this competitiveness survey actually point to some real challenges for us in terms of managerial capability. And I spoke earlier about skills. getting the skills we need. Yes, there's been really rapid digitization, but I'm hearing from business that they now want to embed what they've done in the last year in their business processes, leverage it in a way that makes for sustainable business, and they are struggling to get the skills that they need. And if we're not going to open our borders until the middle of next year at the earliest, I genuinely think that's an issue for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I have a last question, and I'm actually taking a question from the audience, which I think is great to finish our webinar today. So your three countries have performed very well in the 2021 rankings. You all go up for reasons that we have already discussed. So I would like to ask you not about your countries, but about the ranking itself. If you look at the top 5 positions this year, remember that they are Switzerland, number 1, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, and Singapore. What would be the reading of the ranking for you? I think Minister Kung made an initial statement about that, but what is the lesson that you can take from the rankings and looking forward for your countries? What have you learned by looking at the best performing countries? Let me start, Melinda, with you this time.
Arturo, I think that what I would take at a high level is innovation. Innovation and stewardship, and looking at opportunities and actually business and government working together, with government providing really strong stewardship of the opportunities. And I think when you talk about opportunities in digital and tech, which are incredibly networked, there's a lot of first mover advantage, there's a lot of scale opportunity. I think it calls for a little bit more of that stewardship, and I think it's something that we're going to have to get our heads around in Australia, because there is a history of thinking about picking winners and the fact that we don't do it well, and we don't want to do this, and we don't necessarily have the same level of strategic investment in those innovation opportunities. And if I, at a glance, look at those 5, I would suspect that they do a much better job of strategic investment, including with the government as partners, and really driving innovation and productivity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Minister Kung, so what is your conclusion from the rankings this year?
Yes, of course. As we see this year's ranking, the biggest surprise is that some of the Asian economies like Singapore and Hong Kong, which were leading economies in IMD rankings, have witnessed a slight decline in the ranking this year because of COVID. I think this is something we should look deeper into, because never before have we thought that Singapore would even go through negative economic performance. So we would like to look at the reasons behind. So that is to say, in normal times, an economy can excel in its economic performance thanks to its infrastructure and other factors. But in times of distress, such as the economic crisis or health crisis that we have now, countries really have to think about how to react promptly and appropriately. So I think my point is that going forward, if we face a similar outbreak of another communicable disease, I think these are bound to happen. This will not be the last time. If we face a similar situation in the future, can we do a better job? Of course, Taiwan already had a successful experience of fighting SARS about 10 years ago, so we think we are already doing a better job compared to the past. So, of course, we'll learn from the top performance and hope to do a better job in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your last intervention, Mr. Pierrakakis. So what is the lesson learned from this year's rankings, or from the most competitive economies?
I would say that on a national note, we're excited that we're seeing progress, and the progress continued with regards to Greece, even in a very challenging year where we had this full scope of lockdowns and challenging measures that we had to implement. I would also say that we can learn a lot from one another, from the front runners, even though reforms always have a transplant nature. You need to have a donor-receiver compatibility, and there are certain things you can learn and certain things you shouldn't learn. But having said this, I fully agree with what was previously said. Innovation is a key ingredient. In our case, we believe that our country has full potential to further increase its performance if we continue implementing the same reforms. The way in which a digital minister would say it is that our country has the hardware, but it had been missing the software for a very long time. So we have been adding the software for the last 2 years, and we shall continue doing so in the same manner and the same speed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So thank you, our audience. Thank you, our eminent speakers today, our distinguished speakers, Minister Kung, Minister Pierrakakis, Ms. Cilento. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you also to our translators, Mr. Chen and Mr. Chan, for doing such a great job. And remember that all of our rankings are already available in our website if you want to have more information. See you soon. Bye-bye.